Josh Allen has been as consistent as it gets in fantasy football, but he'll be without Stefon Diggs and Gabe Davis this season. We dig into how that will affect his fantasy year and talk through the rest of the Bills' offense on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. I am one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL, fantasy, and betting for sportingnews.com.
This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We are almost through all 32 NFL teams. We've given them each their own episode, talk through their entire fantasy outlook for this upcoming season. We have one division left, the AFC East. A lot of exciting teams in this division, but we're going to start with the Buffalo Bills. Last year, they ended up scraping it together at the end, finishing first in the AFC East after firing their OC Ken Dorsey midseason. They finished sixth in points per game in the NFL and then fifth in fantasy points per game. Josh Allen finished as the quarterback one in fantasy yet again. James Cook and Dalton Kincaid kind of had flashes throughout the season to kind of show that maybe in the future they could be very good fantasy options. Then the Bills trade away Stefon Diggs. They send him to the Texans. They let Gabe Davis walk in free agency, and they draft Keon Coleman with their first pick of the draft, which was the first at the top of the second round there. So let's start with Josh Allen because a lot of changes have been made that might impact his fantasy outlook. So his ADP right now is sitting at quarterback one, anywhere from like 16th overall to 24-ish, but he's been so consistent. Quarterback one in 2023, quarterback two in 2022, quarterback one in both 2021 and the 2020 season. So he's just been amazing. Are you still taking him as a top quarterback this year, Vinny? And are you willing to pay the price that he costs?
Yeah, the funny thing is I've never had Josh Allen on my teams just because I don't take a quarterback early, and someone will always take him earlier than his ranking or ADP would suggest. So I'm never in the running for a Josh Allen because he's not been a good value because of what you mentioned, that he's very consistent. Number one is what you see is what you get, but you also don't get much return on investment there, right? If you invest in him as the number one quarterback, you're going to get the number one quarterback. There's not much higher to go than that. And there's everywhere lower to go, right? If he's not the quarterback one and you take him there, then it's disappointing. But I think you just have to get to the comfort level that he's going to come through and you just have to trust it. Now, could he finish as a QB2 or QB3 behind, say, Jalen Hurts or Lamar Jackson or someone else that comes into the mix? Absolutely, that could happen. But do you feel the most confident about him at least finishing in the top three? I think you do. I mean, he has a pretty high ceiling and a high floor, and part of it is the running. The running is not going to go away. That's a big part of what he's done, even when he has been bad as a passer, when he was inaccurate and he was not very good, he was still a very good fantasy asset because he's just a freight train running. He's what Cam Newton used to be on the ground, except he's faster. He stays upright. He is playing every game. He's extremely durable, tough dude with a big arm. He's going to come through. So as consistent as any asset in fantasy gets, other than maybe like a Travis Kelce, and maybe he's even more so consistent than a Travis Kelce. So again, you shouldn't be disappointed if he doesn't finish at QB1, but you would expect he's still going to finish pretty high. He's going to be very consistent from week to week. Also, he's not going to have a clunker. He's going to find his way to get his numbers every week. So that's what I like about Josh Allen. So again, you just have to be comfortable. Again, it may not turn up, but you know that you've got a reliable asset from week to week. So again, the new OC, we saw the numbers go down a little bit because he had James Cook in the running game be more effective, but it's not like Gabe Davis was a consistent force in Josh Allen scoring. So then we look at what we can do to replace Stefon Diggs in that production. And there's a couple assets that you would go that way. Keon Coleman, you mentioned the rookie. Dalton Kincaid expanded looks there, along with Dawson Knox from the 12 personnel and 2 tight end sets. Khalil Shakir might be ready for the bigger step here. Then you have a short area guy, kind of like he had with Isaiah McKenzie and Curtis Samuel now. So really, Diggs is the only replacement. They're just going to do it by committee. It's just not going to be one guy. But when you look at all the weapons, they're okay for him to produce. And keep in mind, Cook is a good pass catcher, and Allen is their best goal line back over Cook. So all these things add up to say Allen's going to be fine. Again, just don't worry if he doesn't finish as QB1 again. Chances are he will, but if he doesn't, 2 or 3, you still got a great value.
Yeah, the thing with him is like it's not just that he finishes as quarterback 1. Like last year, he scored over 2 more points per game than any other quarterback. So he was that difference maker in your quarterback role. Also, since 2020, he averages 24 points per game. Second highest quarterback there is Patrick Mahomes at 22. So Allen's at the top with, again, 2 more points per game than any other quarterback over the last 4 seasons. He has been absolutely amazing. He's had 4 straight seasons with 40 plus touchdowns scored. That's the longest streak in NFL history. Only one other quarterback has even done it 3 straight times. That was Drew Brees. So like what he's doing is insane. Now, will that fall off with Joe Brady? I think that would probably be my biggest concern is the difference between Ken Dorsey and Joe Brady. Maybe we expect a little bit for like not as many deep passes, but he ran way more often with Joe Brady. So while Brady was the OC, he averaged 9 carries per game. Josh Allen did, while he only averaged 4.8 from weeks 1 through 10 with Dorsey. So that's good for fantasy. And also he averaged more fantasy points under Brady. He averaged 24 fantasy points per game. And he scored over 20 fantasy points in all but one game with Joe Brady as OC. He still was very good with Dorsey in the earlier year, averaging 22.5 points per game, but he had under 15 points in 3 games with Dorsey. So it does seem like he was more consistent, and it was due to that rushing. My biggest concern is Stefon Diggs leaving, but I think Diggs was starting to slow down anyways with his age, wasn't great in the Brady system. So I'm okay. I think Allen's still going to finish as quarterback 1. It just comes down to his price. So when you're looking right now, 16th overall, going around like guys like Devin Achane or Deebo Samuel, Derrick Henry, Sam Laporta, that's who you're giving up to take Josh Allen. And that's what you're going to have to swallow if you want Josh Allen in your quarterback spot.
Yeah, you just have to measure if that's the best person to look at. Like, if it's Deebo versus Josh Allen, I think I'm going all in on Josh Allen, right? Deebo has a lot of volatility with his injury risk and all that, where Josh Allen, I feel comfortable. If it's Travis Etienne, I might go Josh Allen. If I'm looking at Sam Laporta, do I want the top tight end of the board or the top quarterback? Who's going to make a weekly difference for me? It's Allen. And then you start looking at Brandon Ayuk. Is he going to be kind of cooling off from his season last year? I mean, with Samuel, maybe that's a reason alone where they have 2 receivers there, and you say, okay, I'm going to get more consistency from Allen. But I would put him, for me personally, I would have comfort level of taking him in the 3rd round, and that means 25 through 36 in a 12-team league, especially if you're looking at half-point PPR to measure the other positions versus quarterbacks. So that's fine with me. 3rd round. A second might be a little too rich, especially if you're giving up an upside play like Devin Achane, who could be a league winner with his explosiveness for the Dolphins. And like, okay, can I still get a special, pretty good quarterback the next time around or in 2 rounds? Sure. But can I get an Achane anywhere else in the draft? Probably not. So that's how you have to weigh it, right? So it's always the opportunity cost. So great. You have Allen consistency. It's always good to have some consistent assets with some high ceilings. And you mentioned that just shows you running is everything. Keep in mind, he was a top fantasy asset before Stefon Diggs. He was a top asset with Dorsey for a lot of it. He got better with the running with Cook. So there's just all these variables that have kind of tried to affect Josh Allen. But the bottom line is I call him a freight train. He just like is a guy that you cannot bring down. It's hard to tackle. He's going to get all the yards that are available to him on the ground if he's running enough. And you said the 9 attempts. And he's got a massive arm. So, again, he's everything Cam Newton should have been for multiple seasons in this league. Cam gave us one really awesome season when he was the MVP in 2015. Newton is one thing, but this guy is consistent. He takes the hits. He stays on the field and produces year in, year out. So, eventually that MVP is going to come. But, look, this is just a guy that he's just a statistical machine, and you're not going to put him away here in fantasy football. That running, I love the shift to more running and less passing because you can get the yards and scores and fantasy points a lot easier that way.
Yeah, and with Joe Brady's offense, James Cook saw the ball a lot more because they're running the ball a lot more. So we're going to get
Yeah.
into James Cook's fantasy outlook with the new system. But what's his ceiling with Josh Allen stealing all of his touchdowns? We'll get into him and Dalton Kincaid's fantasy outlook in our next segment. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But with the NBA and NHL playoffs done, the WNBA on a midseason break, the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. And you can honestly, guys, you can make any summer night fun and interesting with a bet on whatever baseball game's playing that night. Throw it up on TV, place a bet, and then you have a rooting interest. And all of a sudden, your night is a blast. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports partner of Major League Baseball. Let's start here with Dalton Kincaid because I do think if Josh Allen's going to be quarterback one again this year. Obviously, his rushing matters a ton, but someone is going to have to break out in this offense as a receiver. And I think both of us agree Dalton Kincaid should be that guy, right? So last year as a rookie, he was drafted in the first round last year in the NFL draft. As a rookie, he finished as the tight end 11 in fantasy. Not terrible for a rookie tight end, especially one that had to split a lot of time with Dawson Knox. Only had 2 receiving touchdowns as well, but he really did go through a span of time where he was showing that he could be great in this league when Dawson Knox was out with an injury. A lot of this is projecting that he's going to make a big leap. Why do you feel confident that he can do that, Vinny?
Well, a couple things. I mean, Sam Laporta was an exception that we don't get a lot of rookie tight ends to produce, but year two is what we circle. And that's when Trey McBride went off here as he transitioned to be the main man. And they didn't have a lot of receiving options because Zach Ertz kind of broke down. So it was all the opportunity there for that transition, right? There was no real receivers. They were trying to find their way starting over at that position. And then it opened the door for McBride to be very successful. What also happened was you had a mix of quarterbacks that got the ball to McBride. So I think it's a very similar story because McBride, I think, was the most talented receiver in his draft class. I think Kincaid clearly was that in his draft class. So with all due respect to Laporta, who's produced, he may be a better complete tight end, but we don't necessarily want Kincaid to be that traditional tight end. We want Dawson Knox to handle that dirty work here with the blocking and inline. We want them to move around Dalton Kincaid and be the move tight end and put him in positions to be a hybrid wide receiver. Why did you use a first round pick on him? Because you loved his talent as just a pure receiver. And look, I thought you were going to get a discount for him. That's not going to happen anymore, folks. I'm sorry to tell you. He's now in the range of the 50s, so right in that fourth, fifth round turn in 12-team leagues. He's going as tight end 5 behind the aforementioned McBride. It goes Laporta, Kelsey 1-2, then McBride, and then Mark Andrews right now on the board. So Kincaid's not the best value, but I think you can get a huge return on this guy. I mean, he can stretch the field. I don't know if you're going to get a lot of touchdowns from him yet, because again, he's a little bit of a field stretcher, athletic guy. I think he will get a little bit more work in the red zone as we go into the season a little bit and gets comfortable there, but he's going to have a lot of volume inside. There's no doubt about it. I mean, they got to figure out Coleman and his role. Khalil Shakir, still a young receiver. Curtis Samuel's a short area guy as well. So Kincaid is actually the guy that can stretch the field and give them that ability in the middle of the field, down the seam, or even lining up outside. So I love Dalton Kincaid. He's good talent. It didn't make sense when they drafted him last year to add to that mix. I think they could have done something else to try to get over the hump in the AFC, but now it makes sense when they move on from Stefon Diggs. And okay, now we saw the value of this pick, a little bit longer term pick, but I really like what Kincaid can do here in this offense, and they're not silly. They're going to use him in the right way. And keep in mind, Joe Brady, there was a little bit of connection to Greg Olsen in the end of days there with him in Carolina.
It is interesting because Trey McBride had his breakout last year in the second half of the season, and he's going about 8 picks earlier than Dalton Kincaid. but they're kind of in the exact opposite situations.
Yeah.
McBride got all the targets last year because there was no one else there. Then they bring in Marvin Harrison Jr. Well, Kincaid wasn't actually capable of getting too many targets for most of the weeks because he was in an offense with a lot of stable playmakers. So, and now Kincaid's might be that dude where he's like pretty much the last guy standing there.
Yeah.
And you could see him leading the team in targets. So, if you had to pick between the two, would you pick McBride at 44 overall or Dalton Kincaid at 52 overall?
Well, you know where I'm going here. I always like the better value and the guy that has just as much upside. And I'm glad I set you up and you spiked that right over the net on that, because I was trying to just make the point where he's this year's McBride. I don't want last year's McBride and this year, whatever. I want this year's Kincaid, however you look at it. I want this guy because he's in that situation. Marvin Harrison Jr. is a factor that we didn't have in Arizona, where we minus the key receiver in Buffalo. So I would say follow it. Who can be the top target on his team? I think McBride had to be that by default last year. He's not going to be the top target again with Harrison on the field, but Kincaid certainly can be. I mean, he could lead the team in targets, and you would not be surprised. And if the targets are there, the talent is there, the quarterback is there, offense is there. I mean, it all adds up to Dalton Kincaid, even Michelle, with his rise away from sleeper dumb into tight end 5. I still think he's a good value there over those tight ends that are going above him. And I'm circling him in every league. I think that's a way to look at it. He's one of the players that I would target there whenever I can get him in the right spot.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Dalton Kincaid. Really like him this year. Now, James Cook, I think you're a little bit higher on him than I am. Right now he's sitting at running back 14, 47th overall, which looks like decent value because last year he finished as a running back 11 overall, running back 19 points per game though, so not as efficient from week to week. He's entering his third season, second round pick in the 2022 NFL draft. But he went through that stretch of time that really helped out his fantasy points. And it was when Joe Brady just took over and he was getting all of these carries and was actually scoring touchdowns for once. He went through a nice stretch, but then towards the end of the year, it went back down, scoring 5 points, 5 points, 6 points the last 3 weeks of the season, and then didn't do all too much in the playoffs either. What is his ceiling playing with Josh Allen? Because Josh Allen steals so many of the rushing touchdowns. Do you think that James Cook does have a top 8 finish in him, or that's just never going to happen with a running back playing with Allen anytime soon?
Well, the good news is that you look at James Cook, the competition has really dwindled here. You got the rookie Ray Davis, you got Ty Johnson. These are some of the guys behind him now. It's not this mix of, are we going to work in these dudes from the past, the Latavius Murray types, Naheem Hines, those type of guys that were in the mix. So he's going to get a majority of the touches through most of the downs here. I think he is targeted probably for a 20 touch per game kind of role, right? He has to be, unless Davis just is awesome in camp and they want to get him on the field. But you're right. I mean, I think the touchdowns are going to cap him. I can't see him necessarily being good for double-digit touchdowns. It's going to be very hard to ask for that, especially with Allen and the amount of attempts he's getting. So really, your two running backs are Cook and Allen on this team. So he's kind of battling that all the time. But my other concern is with the tight ends, and now Curtis Samuel. We know what Curtis Samuel does. He catches really short passes. That's what he does. How much is going to be there, right? If he's not getting touchdowns, what's going to be there in the pass game? What's going to be there? Is it going to be all traditional rushing yards that he's going to have to do it? And it's really hard to get there, right? If you're just trying to get the carries and yards and touchdowns to put up fancy numbers, it's really hard. You need to supplement with like 3 for 30 catching, right, to really get over the hump with that number. But look, he's really talented. There's no competition. He should dominate the touches. So again, whenever there's an opportunity, the backfield, Cook should get most of them. So that's going to help him alone. But you're right. He's probably capped. I like him somewhere in the 10 to 15 range. I'll say that to be safe, to get what your return on investment is. I think 10 might be a little bit too much for my blood, but 15 there right in the early part of the RB2s, I think I would feel good about him. So I don't know if I'm higher or lower on him than you are, but I'm kind of just be a little bit careful about overdrafting this guy.
Yeah, I think his price is very fair. I just don't know how high of a ceiling he has. I think some people are expecting him to, have a top 5 ceiling. I don't think I see that unless they just totally stop using Josh Allen around the goal line.
Yeah.
But from weeks 11 through 18, when the Bills went to Joe Brady as OC, they averaged the most carries per game in the NFL during that span. So they liked to run the ball and they're winning games, right? So it was a
Yeah.
winning formula for them. So I do imagine they're going to try to do that, which should lead to a lot of touches for James Cook, like you said. It's just how much is he used as a receiver? Could be a lot with Diggs and Davis gone. Maybe they do more short to Cook and Curtis Samuel. But at the same time, like he's going right next to Joe Mixon. I feel a little bit better about Joe Mixon scoring double-digit touchdowns in that Texans offense was playing with CJ Stroud than I do Cook. So I think Mixon is safer, while Cooks, if he happens to get lucky with those touchdowns, he will be a really good running back. With Mixon, he's going to get the touchdowns.
Yeah, and Mixon, we know he had a dozen last year for the Bengals, so he always has his ability to score. He's pretty good in that capacity, a little bit more than Cook. So we'll see how it plays out. Now, the receivers are making us feel a little bit nervous here. Without Stefon Diggs, we've talked about Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel, Keon Coleman. We'll key in on them in our final segment on the Bills. We told you at the top, this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professional for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role in a new organization. In a given month, more than 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. And you can count on LinkedIn as well if you're a small business. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. That's right. In just one day, hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier for you. They even launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. Join the 2.5 million small business that use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. It's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All right, let's get into the wide receivers. I'm trying to figure out this. I've looked at this over and over again. Now, currently, no one is going without Stefon Diggs or Gabe Davis as a wide receiver 3 that's in the top 36. So help me figure this out, Michelle. We have Keon Coleman. He's going around wide receiver 46. We have Curtis Samuel right behind him at wide receiver 50. And if we didn't want to make this more confusing, you have Khalil Shakir at wide receiver 53. It's the old, we're not sure. So we're going to rank everyone together in the industry. So I don't know where to go exactly. I think there's so many variables this year to figure out. Maybe this is why I love Dalton Kincaid so much.
Yeah, this is exactly why I love Dalton Kincaid so much, because it's hard to envision any of these 3 guys having like a great fantasy season. With Coleman, he is like a big body dude that you can get excited about. He's over 6'3", 213 pounds. He scored 11 receiving touchdowns last year. He was the only Florida State player with even more than 3 receiving touchdowns last season. So like it's in there for him. It's just he has some limitations coming, a little bit raw. We don't know if he's ready to be that main wide receiver for his quarterback just yet, but maybe he'll surprise us, right? So Keon Coleman, obviously, I think has the most upside out of these guys. Like Curtis Samuel and Khalil Shakir just feel like that. The smaller guys that are going to get a lot of not too far deep down, like low average depth of target, I'm trying to say, they're going to need so many receptions to be viable or relevant for fantasy. Like even Khalil Shakir last year from weeks 8 through 18, he led the Bills in receiving yards. He was getting work when Diggs was like kind of falling apart. He was still only the wide receiver 51 during that span. Like he was still not doing anything for fantasy. He had one good week that you were really excited you played him, and after that I don't really see it for Samuel or Shakir. But if I was going to take a bet on anyone, I guess I'd go with Coleman. But I don't think it's going to be pretty to start the season. Like I think it'll take at least a handful of weeks to get him going.
Yeah, it's going to be kind of a committee approach between these three guys, and you make a really good point on Shakir, a really good point on Samuel as well. You know what his average was last year? It was like 9.9 for the Commanders yards per catch. So that's a really short area receiver doing some things after the catch. So again, I think he is the Isaiah McKenzie replacement on delay, that little gadget dude that they can put in the slot to make some plays. And then Shakir, look, he has some field stretching qualities. That's the one thing I'm a little bit concerned about, is that Coleman could do that, but he didn't have the best kind of postseason pre-draft workouts here. So it's so funny to me that Xavier Worthy was on the board, and the trade between the Bills and Chiefs here. They gave the Chiefs the fastest receiver to work with Patrick Mahomes, and they probably could have used that player with Josh Allen to track down his balls. Now, if he's Xavier Worthy, I'd be probably all in on him as the number one outside receiver for Allen. But now Coleman, he's a bit of a work in progress. We got to wait. Shakir and Samuel might cancel each other out a little bit. Someone else going to step up on this team? I'm not sure. Like, it could be a lot of Kincaid and Knox and Cook being involved in the pass game. Hey, what team throws a lot to the tight end and uses running back, and they're trying to figure out wide receiver? Oh, yeah, that's the Chiefs. So maybe the Bills are trying to copy the Chiefs formula and say, okay, tight end is going to be our alpha. We're going to have a good running game with different guys in there led by Cook. And then the receivers are kind of, okay, we're going to get to the level of having the Justin Watsons and Marquez Valdez-Scantling and those type of players out there for your quarterback. It's strange to do, but again, they won. If Diggs was not really a factor and Davis was inconsistent, they won doing this. So I think they're comfortable doing this. So I don't know. I think I would avoid all three of these guys for now. I mean, Coleman, I want to be in on him more. I think he's a good sleeper. I just think, as you said, I don't think we're going to see the dividends until maybe mid-season, after season. He's not a bad end of the bench guy to have, but don't expect that you can play him for a while until we see him get established in that role and they're trusting him a little bit more as kind of a number one receiver. Then you could say, okay, Coleman is there. But let's see how it plays out. But for now, Kincaid and Cook by far our biggest targets on this team after Allen.
Yeah, and make sure to be reading up on training camp reports. If Coleman is
Yeah.
breaking out, then maybe we feel a little bit more confident in that. But where Coleman's going, like behind him is Cortland Sutton and Jamison Williams and Curtis Samuel, his teammate, and Tyler Lockett. Like, I'm okay taking a shot on Coleman in that situation.
Yeah.
He is also going right next to, though, Brian Thomas Jr., first round rookie wide receiver for the Jaguars, who also has an opportunity to be the top target on his team with Trevor Lawrence. So if you had to pick between Coleman or Brian Thomas Jr. Late in your draft, who are you going with?
I think Thomas is a little bit more polished, and the strange thing is he's battling Gabe Davis, the former Bill, for the key outside targets there. So I think they want to stretch the field better with Trevor Lawrence. I think that's going to help Thomas definitely on the outside. I think he's also probably going to be in that Zay Jones role that was pretty valuable to Lawrence that he was throwing to, even more so than the Ridley role. So when I look at it there, I think he's a better talent. I mean, that's why he won the first round. He's got the quarterbacks. I'd say Allen has the edge for sure, but like Lawrence needs some guy to maybe push him forward. And I think Thomas is just a better talent. That's the bottom line with that, with why I would go him over Coleman. I think the path to the key targets in his particular offense is also a lot clearer.
Yeah, I loved Brian Thomas coming out of school. So I'm going to stick with the talent there over the particular situation. That is it for today's episode. Thank you to you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Every dayers, Vinnie and I will be back tomorrow talking about the Miami Dolphins and their 2024 fantasy outlook. Don't miss it. Bye, y'all.